Let's take a closer look at the different amount fields. So in NetSuite, there are many different amount fields available in a transaction saved search, and it's important to understand how each number is derived. What we're going to do is take a look at a saved search in NetSuite that is filtered to the main line of a single transaction. In this case, a customer invoice within our Canadian entity. This entity has a functional currency of Canadian dollar, but the transaction itself has been processed in US dollar. It's been processed in the accounting period April 2023, and the appropriate current consolidated exchange rate for that period is 0.9. However, the transaction currency to convert from USD back to CAD is 1.2. The transaction amount is $10,000 before tax, and the tax applied is $500. Let's jump into NetSuite, confirm this transaction, and look at the saved search results. So here is that particular customer invoice we were just speaking about. It's for $10,000 and $500 of tax has been applied. We confirmed it's in the posting period April 2023. And here's that line item. So the $10,000, the 5% tax applied. Now I just want to make note that the internal ID of this record is 22966. We can see that in the URL. Let's jump into a saved search now for this particular transaction. So here we have a transaction saved search with two simple criteria. The first is to reference the internal ID of that record. Recall it was 22966. And we are just focused on the main line of this report. Let's go to the results tab. There's a few things I want to draw your attention to. The first is that the consolidated exchange rate field is set to per account. We'll cover that later. And then we have added a whole host of amount fields to this report. That's going to allow us to look at the different values that NetSuite produces depending upon which field we reference. Let's go ahead and run this saved search. So what we're going to see here is information about the main line or the header of this particular transaction. And we can already see some different numbers appearing here. So we're seeing 12,329. We're seeing 10,500. We're seeing 11,742. We're seeing 587. Those are really the numbers that we're seeing here. So how are each of these numbers derived? What do those numbers mean? Well, let's jump back into the presentation and find out. So recall we saw four different numbers scattered throughout the different amounts. The first number that we saw is 12,329 and 97 cents. This number is the consolidated transaction total. In other words, we take the $10,500, which includes tax. We multiply it by the transaction exchange rate to convert from US dollar to Canadian dollar. And then we multiply it by the appropriate consolidated exchange rate. Now notice here the exchange rate that has been applied is the February 2023 consolidated exchange rate. We're going to talk about that shortly, why NetSuite is using the February 2023 consolidated exchange rate when the transaction itself wasn't posted until April 2023 accounting period. The next number that we saw is 11,742 and 83 cents. That's essentially the same number exclusive of tax. Now we have the transaction currency total, which is 10,500. In other words, the $10,000 plus the 500 tax. And then lastly, we have the consolidated tax total, the $500 multiplied by the transaction exchange rate of 1.2, and then multiplied by that same consolidated exchange rate. Again, note it's the February 2023 consolidated exchange rate. Let's find out why that's the case. So, for accounts that are measured at the current rate, the saved search will use the date range period within the saved search criteria to set the appropriate consolidated exchange rate. Now, if you recall, the criteria in our saved search did not reference a specific date range or period. And when we do that, the saved search is going to use the date or period when the saved search is run. So I've run this particular saved search in the month of February 2023. So NetSuite by default uses the consolidated exchange rate for February 2023. That's very important because if you're expecting the system to use the April 2023 exchange rate in order to tie back to your general ledger, you would be mistaken. So it's best practice here to always include a date range or period range within your saved search.